Our host, the world-renowned Christine Enville, an IFBB professional, 3 times world champion, a mentor, an icon, and of course, a founding co-owner of the best supplements money can buy, International Protein. So this podcast is a little different, and if you don't already know, I help International Protein with their digital marketing. As part of that, we're launching a brand new website, which of course needs a wholesale page. So today, I'm interviewing Troy, Christine's business partner, so I can create the right content. Plus, someone jumped onto our Aussie Muscle Guru Facebook page and asked about distribution in Belgium. So it's a little off topic, but Troy gets deep about the ingredients that go into their products and the stamps of quality that you should be looking for. I felt this was valuable information for anyone that uses supplements. Okay, so Troy, we recently had a phone call because I wanted to know more about the wholesale side of your business, and obviously I found that really, really fascinating, and it's because I got asked questions, how do you become an international protein distributor in a different country? So we had this conversation, it was fascinating, it was something that I thought that should really be a podcast because you got so deep on the product itself that I thought that would actually be a really, really interesting for our listeners because they can compare it to other products. And obviously you're a co-founder of International Protein. So how long have you guys been in business? It's 20 years?
About 20, 21 years now. Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you didn't like protein from the beginning. You hated it.
Yeah, look, I was definitely one of those things when we first come up with the idea of launching a brand with Christine, and she goes, what are the parameters that we need to meet? I said, we want protein when people drink it not to be talked about in a way where they say that tastes good for protein. I want them to drink it and just say that tastes good.
Yeah.
Because I generally wasn't a high protein user. I'd more eat chicken, fish, meat. When we launched in the market, we were lucky there weren't too many other brands, and we seemed to tick that box for really, really good tasting product. Helped us penetrate the Australian market fairly rapidly.
Yeah, Christine mentioned in a previous podcast that they've got the Troy test. So if it passes your test, then other people generally really like it.
Correct.
So.
Yep.
Look, let's get back to the original question. We got asked, how do you become a distributor in a different country? But I want to bring that back to Australia. Okay, so if people are listening to this all across Australia and they're sort of, toying with the idea of opening a supplement shop, whether it's physical or whether it's an online store, how does that start? How does that process work?
Normally, if they're a physical store, they may actually get a visit from one of our sales reps that are on the road. If they're an online store or they're a store that we're not aware of or an area where a rep wouldn't normally cover, might be, out of Northern Territory, places like that. If they hear about our brand and want to stock it, they'd normally contact us over either social media, ring the office, go onto our website, do a web inquiry, and that would come through. We'd normally get back in contact within 24 to 48 hours if it's within the working week. And from that, it's fairly easy. If a rep can't visit, we'll do a quick phone call, get a sense for what their business is, and then make a offer on what we think, is fair for them to be able to be competitive and still for us to be able to run a business.
Very much a win-win relationship.
Correct.
It's a partnership where if they're not selling the product, then you're not making any money. So therefore, you're kind of wanting to stimulate that as much as you can.
Definitely, because I suppose once you've been in the business for 20 or 21 years, you're more worried about sell out than what you are selling.
Yeah.
So when you're new, you pretty much make your money by signing up new accounts and doing that first big $5,000-$7,000 order. Mm-hmm. When you've been around for 20 years, you make your money by customers coming back every second week or fourth week and rebuying the products.
Yeah.
So it's in our advantage not only to get a big order from a shop, but also for that shop to be able to shift that stock and reorder. We're in it for the long run with accounts.
So you guys are very partnership orientated.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Do you ever sort of like JV or do things like that with people?
Not so much in Australia. When they sign up to have an account with us and it goes through our accounts department, they do sign a credit application, which isn't really a JV, but that does give them the rights to use our logos, images, and marketing material to sell our product through their location. Mm-hmm. So that's somewhat a JV, but normally in Australia, because they're just a reseller, not a distributor for a whole country, you don't really need a JV as much as hopefully we sell them stock and they pay their bills.
So you're completely wholesale within Australia?
Correct.
So let's say I come along, I'm wanting to open a supplement store. I pass the credit checks. I order my first product. How long does that take?
Normally, if it's Brisbane or Sydney, let's say it will take probably next day or the day after latest. If you're in Melbourne, it'll normally take 2 days. If you're in South Australia, it's normally 3 days. And if you're in West Australia, normally 5 days, just because we're on the Gold Coast and that's just the shipping time. But we try to, any order we get before 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we normally get out the same day.
And are there any sort of like COVID slowdowns at the moment, or are you pretty reliable with your
No,
deliveries?
we're very reliable. Even throughout the COVID lockdowns, transport was still going well, and we didn't have any problems getting stock to shops. Sometimes, unfortunately, in the time that the shop had ordered the stock, and 2 days later they were in an area that had been closed down, so the stock come back to us, but there was no problem actually getting the stock out to the account.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of companies out there are really using it as an excuse, aren't they?
Yeah.
But like trucks haven't stopped driving.
No.
Okay, so I guess my next question is like, why would someone want to choose your products versus another protein suppliers? Because it's such a saturated market.
Yep.
What makes you guys so good?
I suppose our time in the market, the fact we're very, very trusted. I don't have data for this, but I would claim one of the lowest return or complaint issues of any company almost anywhere in the world. Obviously, stores want to sell you the stock. They don't want you bringing it back saying they don't like the taste, they don't like the mixability, they don't like anything. They just want to sell you the stock, have a happy customer, have the happy customer come back and hopefully buy the stock again. Also, we have a very large footprint in Australia. So if you're a new account, it means that people walking into the store will already know our brand. So even if you happen to have a store manager that unusually hasn't heard of the brand, people walking into the store will have heard of the brand.
And obviously that's a marketing tactic where we actually create the demand first to drive people through into the stores. So whatever partner you sort of get, we actually support that in marketing. Okay, and the ingredients too. You use really premium quality ingredients. Like for example, you get your whey from New Zealand. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that.
For our brand, we like to use grass-fed wheys.
Yeah.
So 90% of the whey that we get is actually from New Zealand. We do buy some New Zealand whey, surprisingly, from Tasmania as well, but it happens to be owned by NZMP. So it comes to us as a New Zealand dairy product, but from within Australia.
I guess it's the same temperature, isn't it?
Correct, yeah. When we first started using it, New Zealand and Australian wheys were streets ahead of anybody in the market for how clean they were, how well they were made, and how well they mixed in for sports products where you're just adding a flavour and drinking it. A lot of countries have actually caught up with the technology, but we still like the New Zealand and Australian wheys purely not only because we're obviously Australian based, but also because they're so creamy and natural tasting that you don't have to use a lot of flavours to hide the natural whey flavour. Because of those creamy notes, it actually complements our flavours.
Yeah, right.
So even if we tried to substitute out for another one, we'd have to redevelop the flavour because we haven't put a lot of things to hide the natural flavour in there, if that makes sense.
Right.
Where you know people that have obviously used a lot of American-based products and that where they do use very heavy flavour systems, they will obviously notice that even when they come to ours, that whilst the flavours are punchy and nice, they're not over the top sweet, they're not over the top crazy flavoured.
So I guess all the cows, they've got sun to their backs and chewing on grass and
correct. What you find, especially in whether it be New Zealand or even Tasmania, is there's enough rainfall year round to keep the cows on pasture, so they don't have to be grain fed. The benefit with not having to be grain fed is in a lot of countries where cows are grain fed all throughout winter and quite often substituted with grain for the rest of the year, they normally have to give antibiotics, penicillin, things like that, which can carry through to the milk.
Which gives you your bad taste, which means you need to over-flavour. Is that right?
The bad taste quite often comes from the pasture, but obviously in Australia, it's not required to do a penicillin test on any dairy product because we're not allowed to use penicillin on our cattle that can come through to something that you would eat because you could become penicillin resistant. Obviously, in America, it's required on dairy when you export it to do a penicillin test because they use penicillin and bovine antibiotics on the cattle to help keep them healthy from eating grain because it tends to inflame their stomach lining. So the idea is to keep the cow as healthy as you can so you can get the milk. You don't need any of that in New Zealand or Australia where these things are banned. So the good thing is that the source of dairy, not only is the cattle being treated reasonably well, but also there's no hormones, as in bovine growth hormone, antibiotics or penicillin coming through to your dairy product.
And you said NZMP before.
Yep.
Now that's the old Fonterra, right?
Correct.
What does NZMP stand for?
Well, it's funny. Everybody, anywhere you go, anywhere in the world, and I travel to a lot of places, if you say NZMP, which is Fonterra's new logo as of about 3 years ago, they look at you blank and don't know what you're talking about. Then you say Fonterra and they go, oh, yeah, the guy's from New Zealand.
Well, I'm a Kiwi and I don't even know who NZMP is.
So they actually rebranded themselves about 3 years ago with NZMP it's probably been a good move from, well, definitely hasn't affected their sales. Yeah, but I don't think everybody's caught up to the marketing behind the NZMP yet.
So am I correct in the understanding that they actually audit your company as well?
Yeah, look, if you use their logo like what we do on our Amino Charge WPI,
yeah,
they will actually come and audit the amount of product you're buying, your batch documents, how much you've used. So obviously if you're buying, let's say, 7 tonne in a year and you've produced 38 tonne of a product that has a NZMP logo on it, there'll be a lot of questions asked and they'll ask you to remove your packaging from the shelves.
Yeah, so it's like a stamp of quality or something,
Correct.
Isn't it? So what other products do you use, Troy?
Everywhere we can, where we can use a branded ingredient and the company allows us to use our logo, as people are very aware with our range, we will put that logo on the tub so people are aware that we're using it. Also with that NZMP, that company will then want to audit us. So we believe in using those products.
The best branded products you can possibly find as opposed to just some...
Yeah, because look, a lot of the listeners might not actually understand the supply chain of raw ingredients. You can get one raw ingredient that has the same name as another and it costs $2 and the branded one costs $17, but it's standardized to a certain active level. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the name, it's actually got that active amount. And normally within the rules of the FSANZ food rules in Australia, we will add the product to the dosage limit that the company recommends to actually get the active effect. In some cases, we don't quite reach those limits, but very rarely, just because the FSANZ food law says you're not allowed to put that much in. So we can in every other country, but just not here. Right. Also, quite often with the branded ingredients is they'll do their best to extract the nasty flavours and stuff. So the $2 ingredient might taste like bark, and the $17 ingredient actually, when you mix it up, is almost a neutral taste in water. So obviously when you add that to a pre-train or anything, you're not fighting hard with a lot of chemicals and a lot of artificial sweeteners and stuff to cover those nasty notes. Like with everything, the better your base that you start with, the better to finish.
And you guys originally started the company with the intention to actually create something that was much better and a premium quality to start with. Obviously, Christine was pretty focused. In fact, you were a bodybuilder in your time too, weren't you? So you guys were actually all about results and also creating something premium, but making it a really good taste.
Yeah.
So I guess that drove you to buy the quality ingredients.
Yep. And look, back when we started working on the first 3 products that we launched, we're talking about back in the days when there was Weeder 10,000, I think it was called, on the market, where you got 10,000 calories if you added the half litre of ice cream and the 5 bananas they said on the packet. Right. There was Musashi had grown. Max's was only about 2 years old. There was Balance that Peter McCarthy owned that I think he'd just sold off to Weeder. So when we thought this up, I think when we launched, there might be 9 or 11 different brands in Australia. Now there would be well over 500.
Right.
So, we launched then when Christine was getting ready for shows. Back in those days, a lot of Fonterra 25 kilo whey bags and 20 kilo whey bags sitting in the kitchen as such, making up her own little concoctions. She worked with a company back then called Essential Flavors that made some very premium flavors, and she'd make up little concoctions and say, oh, here's a chocolate. And you go, oh, man, this tastes like chocolate mousse. Yeah. Why isn't this on the market? Because the old drinks used to almost burn your throat as you drank them. Well, back in those days too, most supplements were developed by biochemists. They weren't developed by food scientists, where food scientists thinking about not only the actives, but they're thinking about the finished product, the texture, the flavour. Biochemist gets on the whiteboard, works out the perfect formulation. It's not their concern necessarily whether that's palatable or not. So when you say, I can't drink this 3 times a day, you're killing me, goes, but look at the whiteboard, it's showing you the great results. So obviously when you go into the marketplace and also when you go to the wider market, you need to tick a few of those boxes. You can't just say, hey, this is really active, but it's like drinking vinegar. You have to say, it's really active, it's reasonably palatable, the texture's okay. So, but the market shifted 100 years in 5 year sets, and if that makes sense. Like once supplements in Australia really exploded, probably over a 7-year period, everybody lifted their game. You don't see people with photocopied labels on shelves anymore and all of those sort of things.
Photocopied labels, interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting. So tell me, coming back to the branded products, tell me what the difference between like a standard green tea and a tavigo is.
Yep. So a standard green tea, it isn't necessarily where all of the crop that it's been pulled from is from the one farm or from a standardised farm. It'll be from whatever farm has stock at the time to supply the factory.
Right.
Then the product's made. And yes, it's green tea, but it isn't made and it doesn't account for seasonal variations. It doesn't account for flavour notes. It's just made and the product is what the product is. it may be at the strength that you think you're getting, or it may be a tenth of the strength you're getting, but they don't guarantee a standardization behind that. Okay. When you go something like Tavigo, they will only pull from certain farms. They will make stock at a certain time of year when it hits the strength that it's meant to hit. Then they will actually do the tests and say, this is Tavigo, here's a C of A, and we guarantee everything is at these levels. So I suppose you know what you're getting.
All right, so let's switch this up a wee bit. Let's say I become a shop. How are you going to support me in selling products?
There's a few different ways that we can support you, and this has morphed or changed over the last probably 10 or 15 years. Now a lot of shops very active themselves on social media, very active with their own marketing team, and they're happy to run with the ball themselves, and that's great. Makes our life easy, and we just help in whatever way they actually reach out and say, hey, would you guys help? Mm-hmm. But what we normally do if accounts like it, and also if we think it will be of aid, we contact local gyms in the area. We have athletes that we sponsor or reps go in and do tastings and recommend that they go down to the local shop that we've just stocked. So we try to get the sales in there. We try to educate the public, so when they go into the store, they already recognise the brand. I've tasted the brand and go, hey, I'm happy to buy that. So it becomes an easy sales transfer for the new account. We also have sample sachets within reasons for accounts we can't get to. And a lot of our reps, probably 50% of their time is actually spent staff training now.
So the more information you give them, the more they understand.
Correct. So when somebody comes in and asks a question in store, whether it's about our product or somebody else's product, if we have done our job properly, the staff in the shop will feel comfortable enough discussing our product with a customer who's asking fairly technical questions. And the more comfortable they feel, the more they'll obviously recommend it, and then the better advice they give to the client. All of those things sort of, I suppose, come to that little bubble of marketing as such. Whilst some people look at them as direct marketing and not direct marketing, we do find between the tastings and the staff training is the key to making it a success in the new shop.
That's sales 101. Put the product in the person's hands, right? They taste it, and then, once they taste it, I mean, it's a bit, from my point of view, and I'm probably a little bit biased, but it's probably some of the best I've tasted. Yep. But once you've tasted it, you're sold.
Yeah, and that's it. And obviously, if you walk into a shop and you're a new user or a user looking for something, and you walk in and say, hey, I tried this, I've had it a couple of times, I'd like to try something different. If the shop staff's comfortable explaining the ingredients and understands them, then obviously, that's a win as well, because not only is the shop staff normally going to hopefully recommend your product or explain it to the customer, but when they explain it positively in a sequence that makes sense, then the customer's confident.
And of course, a lot of them use it themselves because they know it so well, they recommend it. Okay, so let's switch it out of Australia now, and let's talk about, because on the Aussie Muscle Guru Facebook page, we've actually been asked, and that actually drove this podcast, but it actually got asked, how do I get distribution rights into Europe? So how does that work? How does that process?
Yep. So for a lot of countries, having an Australian dairy export license, and you need the dairy to export all of the whey products, whether it be WPI, for us, amino charge, WPI, superior whey, synergy, anything with over 20% whey in it, you need a specific export license granted by the Department of Agriculture of Australia. So for about 50% of the countries in the world, if you have that export license, the person's just got to have an import license at the other end, and it just gets shipped to them. Easy days. Right. So it's a matter of that person contacting us, or sometimes us going out and finding them at expos, getting a connection from another country where they've done business with somebody in another country, pretty much just starting up business. And normally what we do there is we just make sure we haven't got another distributor who's selling in that area or another distributor in that country, because normally what we have done to this point, in most countries, we only have one distributor. And what we do then is, if any other person wants to become a distributor, we connect them with our current distributor and say, hey, if you're happy to work with them or do a JV, or they look after the north of the country and you look after the south, that's between you and them to work out. We just keep on dealing with you, and that obviously grows their business. It's the opposite to what a lot of countries' supplement brands do, where they just go for anybody who wants to buy it. Yeah. But we've found that loyalty's been repaid. We're just a little Australian brand, and we have some very solid.
You're not that little, buddy. Yeah, you like to think you are, but you're not.
We actually do have some very solid over 12-year relationships with distributors now. And I can fly to countries even like Malaysia, and my little distributor there will pick me up, and his kid's wearing international protein hats, his wife's wearing international protein shirts.
Awesome.
So some other countries it's a little bit more difficult. Some countries require you to register all of the products. Some only require you to register the brand. That can take anything from 3 months to 3 years.
So you've been jumping through these hoops for a long time with multiple different countries. So would it be fair to say that you try and make the distributor's life really easy on the other end?
Well, look, definitely. Even for those really technically hard countries, and Brazil's one, Thailand's one, probably two of the hardest countries in the world, where we export to both of them. 90% of the actual heavy lifting is done by my technical team, my quality team that has to supply all the paperwork, all the flow charts, all of the what we call PIFs and certificates of analysis. A little bit of the other work with the registrations from the other side obviously has to be done by the importer because they're responsible for the product once it's in the country.
Yeah.
But 90% of the work's done by us, and we don't shy away from that at all. As I say, Brazil probably took 2.5 years, and now we go quite well there.
Do you have a minimum purchase required? Or do you kind of grow that distributor from the ground up?
Look, we do grow that distributor from the ground up. We find that most people sit around the 3 to 5 pallet order when they start, but really, if it's $5,000 to $12,000, that's somewhere a starting point. And
Australian dollars.
Australian dollars, AUD, and they can test the market. They can get it out to a few accounts. You have enough stock. The reason we sort of set it there is there's about $1,800 in micro, pathogen, and paperwork fees just for the Department of Agriculture to let us ship the product. So obviously, if the person wants to put a $1,000 order in, even though I'm happy to promote business in another country, it's going to cost me $1,800 before I pay technical staff or anything, just in paying the government for their end of this.
Yeah.
Normally around that $5,000 to $12,000 worth, we're happy to absorb that $1,800. And the good thing is, what we found with the 16 countries we export to at the moment, normally start off with about that 3 to 5 pallet order.
Yeah, right.
Next one, they go to a 10 pallet order, which is a 20-foot container. And then pretty much 3 weeks after that's landed, they go to a 21 pallet order, which is a 40-foot container. Obviously, once you're up into the container, the $1,800 fee, because it's $1,800 whether you do 5 tubs or your 40-foot container, because you have to raise the same documents, that becomes negligible then. Not to sound cocky, but whilst signing countries up when you're an Australian brand can be quite hard, we don't have a government system where they pay for the first 2 years of advertising. They give you a 25% tax rebate for exporting dairy goods from Australia. We do, we play on what they call that level playing field, but we're the only ones at that level, which a lot of exporters will probably have a slight gripe about. Any country where we have found a distributor who understands our brand and is willing to put the work in, we haven't failed, regardless of price, struggles to get it in.
Yeah.
As soon as we land it tends to go off because we're selling to people that really care about what they're eating.
So tell me, when someone becomes a distributor, what kind of support can you give them outside of the paperwork and the documentation, actually getting it into the country? Do you actually help them get it to market as well, or is it totally on their side of the fence?
No, at the moment, most of the distributors, apart from some small advertising rebates for volume purchases and that, which anybody who's listening, who's in the distribution game will understand what I mean by that. Normally some of our team will go and visit the country. Sometimes we do sponsor some well-known, impressive-looking IFWE pros. And in a lot of countries where bodybuilding isn't big like America or even Australia, you take a 140-kilo pro over there in shape, it's its own market approach because they'll put them on the national news, they'll talk to them. So we do as much as we can. And normally what we try to do is visit most countries either 2 to 4 times a year. So we'll go there as a little team, even down to the point that my Indian distributor can vouch for this. I'll get in the car, do an 18-hour drive with him and visit every little shop that might only have 3 tubs of my product at that time to shake their hand, thank them for taking them on. And next time I go back there, half the shop will be international protein because they haven't had somebody do that before. So there's the normal marketing and the digital stuff and all that stuff that really everybody does fairly well these days.
Yeah.
But that old school 1950s style, get on a plane or get in your car and go shake somebody's hand and meet their family.
It develops real relationships.
Yeah. Look, in a lot of countries, that is actually gold.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me the difference. If I was living in Europe and I wanted to, and I was looking at all the different products that I could bring in, why would I want to choose Australian versus American? Because there's so many American products.
Look, and that's probably $1 million question. The way I suppose I can explain this the best, apart from the fact that Australian product comes with your Department of Agriculture seals, all the testing's done by third-party people, But let's say most big American brands are totally trustworthy as well, because you wouldn't risk $1 billion business. We're all somewhat on a level playing field. Our flavour systems are somewhat different than the American ones because we'll develop them for the Australian taste buds. The American companies obviously develop them for the American taste buds and then ship them out to other countries. So some countries we find, like Thailand and even India, our flavours connect with the people a lot more than what the American flavours do, much the same as
I'm assuming the American flavours are a lot sweeter.
Yeah,
it's a massive assumption, but am I right?
They're a lot sweeter, and they're also, I suppose, like if you could picture Dr. Pepper compared to Coke. Coke obviously sells well in Australia. Dr. Pepper, so-so.
Yeah.
So what you will find is a lot of the American vanillas have that almondy back note to them because that's what they really like in America and what they're used to.
Mm-hmm.
In Australia, people just don't like that flavour.
Right.
We like more vanilla bean custard flavour, But also, I suppose, normally in most countries that I export to, I'm the only Australian brand.
Right.
So whilst it's probably not the greatest marketing strategy, being the only brand from one country tends to make that pond a little bit bigger for you.
Yeah.
Because there are a certain amount of people that either want to buy Australian, haven't tried it before, trust it. I suppose you're sort of running in your own lane, even though you're competing against the Americans, you're still marketed as an Australian product and you're the only one in that market.
Yeah. But what about the complexity of buying American versus Australian? Is Australia a bit more complex, but the product's a lot better? Or
yeah, look, the thing with
the
regulations they're different.
Yeah.
So obviously, quite often or what most people listening to this, if they've used sports supplements or somewhat have read anything on Google or reviews, they'll realise in Australia, the food standards doesn't allow you to have what you call a proprietary blend. In America, you're allowed to do a proprietary blend. So you can put 12 aminos together and say, here's your 18 gram serve of aminos, but you don't have to declare how much of each amino is in there.
Right.
So let's say glycine being a cheap amino that some people might use to fluff out the formulation because it keeps the price down, might therefore make up 40% of all of that mix. In Australia, you can't have a proprietary blend. You need to list out everything that's in there. And you also have to list it in order of most abundant to least abundant. Mm-hmm. So obviously our labels are a lot more transparent, and people will also notice on our labels to be Australian compliant, you need to have a per serve and a per 100 grams. You'll notice with the American labels, they only have a per serve. So you will find when you're trying to compare apples with apples, it's easy with Australian products because when you're looking for percentages or anything like that, obviously you read the 100 gram column and the 100 because it's 100 automatically gives you the percent. So if you're 82 grams of protein in 100 grams, you'll automatically, hopefully most people will just connect that dot and go 82%.
So let's get into the regulations. Now, from my understanding is that America allows the own companies to regulate their own products versus Australia has to use a third-party source. Is that right?
In some cases, and quite often, there's very similar documents, obviously, to export from America or Europe or Australia. But you will find in Europe and Australia, all of those documents have to be either signed off, verified, or raised by a third-party person. In Australia, in-house micro and pathogen testing is not recognised. So it's nice to do for your own knowledge, but if you take that to court or to get an export document, they will just laugh in your face.
Right.
Okay. So you have to go to a third-party NADA accredited lab that keeps its accreditation according to how good it does its testing.
Right.
So if you follow that thought, in Vietnam, when we export there, they hold the stock on the port. They take a bag, cut a bag open of their picking, test it and make sure that our test matches there on the wharf test.
Right.
If it doesn't, questions are asked because they're using a NADA accredited lab in Vietnam as well. So it's not in the NADA accredited lab's interest over here because it only keeps its accreditations according to how accurate it is and no complaints, and people work in food or any other sort of industry, they'll understand cars and non-conformances. If you're a NADA accredited lab, you don't want corrective actions or non-conformances raised by a government organisation against your lab. No. Sort of cuts out Uncle Toby's or anybody else wanting to run along and use you next week. So it would be very hard to believe that there was a relationship to benefit the company when connected to a NADA approved lab. So that test result is genuine. Unless there's been a mistake somewhere and it needs to be retested. But within reason, then they're not fudging the test in any way to benefit me to be able to export because that could lose their license. That's not how they earn their money. A lot of American companies are allowed to actually register their own lab within their own business. Obviously, you have to be big enough to build the lab and that. We're talking about big exporters here. And the testing provided is actually done from within their own lab.
So it could be accurate.
Well, quite often it is, but then quite often, and it's not just me saying this. Anybody can obviously Google anything that's lawsuits that have been raised or things like that. But quite often those tests don't quite often match up to what the product is. for a lot of people who are really worried about what they sell and their reputation, having something come from Australia, and that's why it's so popular in China, is they understand that the government is really the people that are responsible for letting it out, and the government doesn't want the Australian dairy industry to stop because you've exported to a country and they've falsified your documents. It's just nonsensical to think that they would do that. And also, if anybody's ever been involved in any food compliance or anything like that, they take it seriously because they're not only looking after our little company, they're looking after another 10,000 little companies, and also within that a couple of billion-dollar companies that would also not be able to export if all exports of dairy were stopped from Australia. Unfortunately, with Australia, we just don't have the population and the power to play those games where we say, well, you're never going to stop us exporting because we're that big that we'd crush you. With Australia, we have to follow the rules and do the right thing. And it's actually good. Like even myself, when I go overseas and I'm in a country where I might have some concerns about counterfeits, or mostly in those countries, I'll call them quality duplicates. I will look for Australian-made product that I know is genuine from Australia because I also trust it. And that won't necessarily even be a product I've made. That'll be, as you say, Manuka honey, milk powder, anything like that, because I also understand the systems.
All right, so just to wrap this up, this is fascinating stuff, by the way, because we got quite deep on that whole exporting, how you support customers. We didn't really touch on labelling, but labelling must be a big part of that, and you guys must be hugely experienced in that. I used to have a mate that helped businesses into Europe again, and he said one of the major things is that people screw up their labelling, and it can actually send companies broke pretty quickly if they've sent a great shipment over and it just falls flat. So with labelling, you guys have got huge experience that you can support any distributors in that.
Definitely. At the moment, 3 of the countries we import into require an oversticker. So the oversticker, everything else looks the same as it does on a shelf here. And the oversticker on the back is in their language, all of the values and warnings that should be according to their food regulations. Most other countries we can just import the Australian product to. We might have to put a sticker on the lid or something that's translated into the local language with the local import license, and that we're sort of lucky at the moment that we don't have any countries that specifically need a whole new label printed. But we are able to do that, and we're more than open to doing that. Obviously, in that discussion, there'd be some volume requirements because by the time we go and spend $70,000 on packaging, if the person says, I want to order 3 pallets across, 10 different flavors, 5 different products, we obviously don't have a little more serious discussion, But if we're up and going with somebody or somebody's seriously talking about decent volume, we're more than happy to reprint. Most of our 1.25 and 2 kilo sizes, things like that, are all digital print now anyway. Digital printing's come a long way, looks a lot fancier. It might even just be a discussion, hey, let's just focus at the start onto this size because it's the easiest to reprint a small run of labels just to fit your country.
But I think China, for example, you just put an over label on.
That's
top
correct.
Of the, and that's almost preferred because they can read it in their own language. But at the same time, they want to actually see that it's a genuine Australian label.
Well, that's 100% right. The countries where we have to do the oversticker before we ship out, which at the moment are Brazil and Thailand, I could have reprinted the packaging because they're taking decent volume. And when I mentioned that to them, they're like, no, stick with your Aussie packaging.
It's actually preferred.
And just put the sticker on because then everybody here knows it hasn't been made within the country and it's a counterfeit. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. China's a little bit easier. When it lands at the port, they do the sticker at the port for you. So we just ship it like a normal shipment and they look after it and it gets to the distributor and everybody's happy.
So easy. I suppose you've just got to send the design across to them.
No, they actually do it all themselves, look after it. A little bit tricky with Brazil and Thailand both is obviously we print the stickers here and apply it to all the packaging before it goes specific for that flavour. And we just need to be fairly careful because we don't read the language that will clearly label the outside of the box. But we get people from within the country to actually make that label design for us. And we just print it here because whilst Christine speaks Portuguese and probably could help out there, we don't have anybody here who speaks Thai really well yet.
All right. So just to wrap this up, as I said, fascinating stuff. Is there anything else we should add to the mix? Is there any other important information?
If anybody hears this and they are from a country where I'm not already importing into, please feel free to go to www.international-protein.com, send a web inquiry in. I'm more than open to have a discussion. If it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't, but I'm still happy to spend the time to do it, and fingers crossed it does go somewhere.
There's on the new website, we're launching a new website at the moment, and there's actually going to be a specific wholesale page where they can connect directly to you, Troy, as opposed to some of your staff. Cool. So and that then results in a phone call?
Definitely. Normally, it results in a couple of emails back and forth. we work out a time that's best to call. And obviously, if it's Thailand, I call online. If it's half the rest of the world, I call on WhatsApp. If it's China, I call on WeChat. I'm not so much into the social media platforms, but at the moment I'm running about 30 because of the export.
Yep. Very good. Hey, thank you very much, Troy. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Definitely. Thanks, guys.
Words of wisdom. If you like what you've heard, recognize that these tips, they're free. So show your support by becoming a loyal international protein customer by jumping online, hunt our product down and hit that buy now button. So once again, like, share and subscribe to our podcast so we can continue to bring you these episodes from our one and only Aussie Muscle Guru, 3 times world champion, Christine Enville.